What was your forget it, I'm finished moment? I put in my 2-week notice at work to pursue a better opportunity. Things have been nothing but positive at that job, but it was time to move on. The next day at work, I get a meeting invite for what I expected to be an exit interview. I walk in, and HR and the corporate lawyer are there. The lawyer demands to know where I'm going to work and starts shouting threats to ruin me with legal action for violating the non-compete agreement. I wasn't. At that point, fuck a smooth transition, I spent the next 2 weeks taking 3-hour lunches, chatting with friends in the halls, and doing zero work.
That sounds pretty intense. It's funny how a simple notice can turn into a whole thing. Being shouted at by a lawyer over a non-compete must have been wild. I get wanting to just coast and enjoy the last days after that. Can't blame you for taking long lunches and just vibing. Sometimes you just have to flip the script when people act out over something unnecessary.
Worked for a snack food company in Colorado. On my last employee review, received great accolades from the owner, and he stated that since I was the only buyer and the company was growing, they would hire someone to help, and I would be the manager. 6 months later, the owner pulled me aside on a Wednesday and told me they hired someone that was starting on Monday and that I would be reporting to that person. I gave my notice on the spot. Later, I looked at that person's LinkedIn and she had 1 year for months experience. I have 20 plus.
That sounds frustrating. You invest time and effort into a job, only to be sidelined like that. It's tough to see someone with less experience take a position you were promised. Giving your notice on the spot shows you had enough. Sometimes it's better to move on than to stay in a place where you don't feel valued. Hope you found something that appreciates your skills more.
I was a broke college student and working part-time as a night janitor and full-time as a research assistant before having to go back to school in the spring. I needed the money to pay for tuition. After my first lease expired, I tried contacting a few places for a summer sublet. But no one got back to me in time, and I had to live a few days in my car. But within a few days of me moving out, the apt owners sent me their responses. At that point, I had already developed a system and was quite used to being homeless. So that entire summer, I just said, fuck it, I'm done, and lived out of my car. I would shower once every 2 days at the university's lab shower and sleep in the unrestricted night parking spots.
That sounds tough. I remember a friend who had a similar situation in college. He was broke and had to couch surf for a while. It was a struggle for him, but he kept pushing through. He'd study in coffee shops and even made friends with a few baristas. Eventually, he found a decent place to stay. Sometimes those experiences teach you a lot about resilience and what you can handle.
My boss waited until the week before proposal was due to start on it. She had received it 2 months prior, and at that point I offered to help and received no response from her. Then, the week before the due date, she comes to me in a panic asking for my help. This was the 3rd time she had done this shit to me. I forward her all of my research and files and stay late every night helping to put together, reviewing the final draft of said proposal. My research is 80% of the content, and I am not listed on the team. Fuck it, I'm done. Accepted another job offer 2 days later. Haven't looked back since. Edit. She owned the company, so there was no going to her superiors. Also, justice/karma. Another employee quit the same day as I did. It was a small company and almost put her out of business. Hopefully it was a wake-up call.
Sounds like a rough situation. It's frustrating when you put in all the effort, and someone else takes the credit. Good on you for making a move and finding a new job. Sometimes you have to look out for yourself, especially when you're working under a boss who doesn't appreciate your contributions. It's interesting that another person left at the same time. Might have made a bigger statement about the work environment than you thought.
Best friend of mine of 16 to 17 years just got married. I was his best man, was in desperate need of a job. I knew my work was looking for someone, and the pay was double what he was making, so I informed him, gave him my boss's email address, and hand-delivered an app to his apartment for him to fill out, also offered to pick him up and drive him to my company office. Even gave my boys his number, which he called 4 times. Never filled out the app, call in, emailed, or answer my boss's phone calls. We passed up a few other well-qualified people just so he can at least get an interview. They were going to give him the job on the spot. Got a call from him yelling at me for not following up for him and getting back to him about the job. His wife called me asking me why I didn't refer him to my boss, and at that point I got rid of his number and haven't spoken to him since. You can let a horse to water, but can't make it drink.
That's rough. It's tough when you go out of your way for a friend, and they don't take it seriously. You tried to help, but some people just don't follow through. It's frustrating when they blame you for their own lack of effort. Sometimes you realize some friendships aren't worth keeping if they don't appreciate what you do for them. It's better to move on than deal with that negativity.
I gave up on my decade-long career as a civil/structural engineer about 6 months ago. It had been a long time coming as my interest in the work itself had dwindled over the 10 years I've been doing it. But my last job was particularly bad, chronically understaffed, 60-plus hour weeks, required to work weekends, and an owner who was a monstrous asshole. The last straw was when in an all-staff meeting he told me, "You're the consultant. Do your fucking job." I'd only been there for 3 months at that point, and was still familiarizing myself with port/marine engineering, as that wasn't what I'd done in my previous job. I don't even remember anything else that happened in that meeting. All I could think of was that I needed to talk to my wife about how I was going to be unemployed for a while. That night when I told her, she said, "If you're still there at 3 p.m. tomorrow, I'm going to be very upset." I quit the next day.
It sounds like you really had enough of that job. I get it. Working with a toxic boss can drain your energy fast. When you hit that point, you just know it's time to make a change. Talking to your wife must have been tough, but it seems like she had your back. Quitting the next day was probably the best decision. Sometimes you just have to walk away for your own peace of mind.
When the man I had loved for years told me we were on hold, he informed me of the exact evening he was going on a date with some new girl and that he'd let me know by the end of the week if we were back on. Amusingly, he got offended when I told him I felt disrespected. The idea of a healthy adult relationship with this man is futile. Feels so good to be done with him.
It's interesting how people can be so oblivious. Like you invest time and feelings, and then they just throw it away like it's nothing. The guy clearly doesn't get what respect means. It's better to move on. Sometimes realizing the truth is freeing. It's nice to detach from someone who isn't worth the energy.
Girlfriend cheated, told her I need space to think. Friend texts me a few days later to find out what happened. Get really into the details with my friend about my relationship with her. He keeps making weird excuses that justify her behavior, like maybe she's scared of how she feels about you, and that's why she cheated. I end up super pissed, stop talking to him. Text him the next day to say fuck off. Turns out he didn't have his phone that night. My ex invited him to a party, stole his phone, locked herself in the bathroom, and impersonated my friend to try and convince me to take her back. Nope.
That's a wild turn of events. You think you're handling things the right way, then your friend pulls a stunt like that. Honestly, it's messed up that he didn't even know what was happening. Trust is important, especially in tough times like that. Sounds like you made the right call to cut him off. You should really keep distance from people who can't respect your feelings. You don't need that kind of drama.
My boss asked me to explain to her a calculation I did. I begin to explain it, and she starts yelling at me repeatedly, "You're wrong. It's wrong," over and over while I'm trying to explain. She won't let me finish. I shut up and sit down while she goes through the calculation and realizes I was right. I did not get an apology. Decided at that moment to begin applying for new jobs in GTFO.
That's a tough situation. It's frustrating when you know you're right, and someone just shuts you down like that. Not getting an apology really adds to it. Sounds like you made the right choice thinking about moving on. Sometimes, leaving a toxic environment is the best way to keep your sanity. It's all about finding a place where you feel appreciated and respected for your work.
3 weeks after my dad died, a supervisor asked when I'd stop using that as an excuse for being distracted at work. I'm in sales. She wasn't my supervisor, but just didn't like me. I posted my resume on Indeed that night and had an interview within a month elsewhere. I've been at my new, awesome job for a year now.
It's tough when people don't understand what you're going through. That supervisor clearly missed the mark. It sounds like you took that as motivation to move on, which is good. Finding a new job and being happy there is a big win. Sometimes you just need to leave behind the negativity and focus on what really matters. Glad things turned out well for you.
I work at a uni, and we needed to develop a new system for handing out scholarships in my department that was much more transparent, as we had a history of favoritism and secrecy. I was on the committee charged with making a solution. We were working hard, had a few meetings, and while we're close to a final recommendation on how the process should work, I find out that one of the other committee members was still currently giving out some big scholarships the old way / secretly. Pissed me off.
That sounds frustrating. It's tough when you're trying to make improvements, and someone is still acting the old way. It's like they don't care about the effort everyone else is putting in. I guess it shows that changing a system takes more than just a committee. You really need everyone on board. Hopefully, you guys can figure it out and make the process fair for everyone.
I was working at a church with an asshole pastor who thought it was his right to call me at any hour of the day over stupid problems. I had addressed it with the church board repeatedly, who promised to stop him, to no avail. I was taking classes at a local university, and he started ringing my phone incessantly in the middle of a class. Thankfully, it was on silent, but you could still hear it vibrating, so eventually I had to turn it off. After the lecture, I turned it back on to several missed messages, and before I could even call back, it started ringing again. I didn't even get a word out upon answering, and he was screaming at me over something stupid that was his fault anyway. I hung up on him, called the board secretary, and quit.
Sounds like a rough situation. Dealing with someone in a position of authority who doesn't respect your time is frustrating. It's good you addressed it with the board, but it's disappointing they didn't take action. Quitting right after that call seems like a smart move, though. No one should have to put up with that kind of nonsense, especially when you're just trying to manage your studies. Sometimes you have to choose your peace.
When my BF left me for a friend who moved into the house I used to share with him, I put up with it. When a friendship group stopped inviting me out because they felt awkward having us all there, I put up with it. When rumors and gossip and snide remarks circulated about me, I brushed it off. When I moved interstate and came back for my birthday, and every single one of them bailed hours before the reservation, I cried and got mad, but said nothing. When I went through a tragic loss and was depressed, they all fell out of touch with me. I never received a call, not one. I went away and got some counseling and learned to love myself a little more. When I returned to their world, I discovered they knew about my issues and had been derogatory. The first night, I saw everyone at a house party. They all gathered in one room where I was not allowed to go. Finally, I realized after 10 years, these people are not friends. I left, and I have never looked back. 2 to 3 years later, I have a wonderful life with a loving BF, many genuine friends, and I am on track to achieve my career goals.
It sounds like you went through a rough time with those so-called friends. It's tough when people you trust turn out to be unreliable. You stuck it out longer than most would. It's good that you took some time for yourself, got help, and moved on. Now you have a better support system and are doing well. It's nice to see that things got better for you.
My old housemate used to tell us about his awful family and how messy/nightmarish they were. He wasn't the tittiest himself at our place, but I figured he just picked up bad habits. I always felt really sorry for him about his family situation, so I tended to give him a bit of a pass. Fast forward to us moving out after a year. His parents come to help, and his room is an absolute state. I cannot adequately describe how vile it was. I'm amazed he didn't have rats in there. When challenged on it, without missing a beat, he swears blind that he'd been staying with his girlfriend, and that in the meantime, I had moved into his room and trashed it, which obviously I hadn't. His parents went apeshit and went to the landlord who believed them and took a cleaning fee out of my share of the deposit instead of his. I was so angry at the guy. I'd always stood up for him against his family/our other pretty shitty housemate, and then he decides to screw me out of 300 pounds.
That's a rough situation. Sounds like you really had his back, and then he turned on you like that. It's crazy how people can twist things to save their own skin. You think you know someone, and then they pull a move like that. It must have been frustrating to see all that support go to waste, especially over money. Trust can be hard to regain after something like that.
Had a receptionist die in school once, so the next day they brought us into an assembly and announced it. My principal went to the hospital to pray over her, and keep in mind this was a Christian school. My Bible teacher gathered a few people in a circle and was shouting, "Wake up," in an effort to revive the person. I got the hell out of there and went home. She did not come back. She remained dead.
That's a pretty intense story. I can imagine how surreal that assembly must have felt. The reaction from the principal and Bible teachers shows how people cope differently with loss. It's a heavy situation, especially in a school setting. It's understandable that you'd want to leave after that. Death can be tough to deal with, especially when it's so sudden and close to home.
I used to be Mr. Nice Guy, constantly helping people with homework, moving furniture, and general any help that they needed. Finally, though someone asked me to drop them off at the train station, was only supposed to take 20 minutes. Well, it turned out to take 3 hours, and I missed a work obligation and got in major trouble for it. The kid did not even feel sorry or anything. At that moment, I said, "Fuck it, I'm done." Now I have no problems saying no to people. It is really sad, though, how angry people get when you refuse to go out of your way to help them.
I used to be like that too, always saying yes and trying to help everyone. But then I had a similar experience where I ended up wasting my whole day for someone who didn't care. It was frustrating. After that, I learned it's okay to put yourself first. You'd be surprised how people react when you set boundaries. Some take it hard, but that's not really your problem anymore.
I had to tell someone that their contractor wasn't doing shit. Said contractor decided to rake me over the coals. I informed my boss of the dust-up, and he blew me off. I was already pretty done, but pushed me way over the edge. I found out recently said boss had been demoted from management. I laughed.
I can relate to that feeling. A while back, I had to deal with a coworker who never pulled their weight. I brought it up, and my boss didn't really care. It was frustrating, but then I heard that coworker had been let go later on. Honestly, it felt good to know justice was served. Sometimes things work out on their own without us having to push too hard.
My boss decided to write an email from my worker's computer. My coworker and I were the only people in the office with older style, larger keyboards, which we preferred due to the specifics of our job. My boss starts mashing the keys, making a typo in every second word. 30 seconds later, he loses it. He starts screaming, pulls the keyboard towards him hard. He flips out the entire computer with it. The keyboard was plugged into the back of the computer. He gets even more enraged, starts screaming for my coworker and I to replace our keyboards immediately. We had several critical jobs going on at the time, so we did not have half an hour to run about the office looking for spare keyboards and setting them up because my boss lacks basic typing skills. Went home that night and wrote my resignation letter.
That sounds pretty intense. It's funny how a simple keyboard can turn into a whole meltdown. I've seen similar things happen, where someone just can't stand tech not working for them. Your boss lost it in a big way, and it must have felt pretty surreal. I mean, so much stress over a keyboard. I can see why you'd want to bail after that.
I had just been admitted to the bar for a year, working for a small firm. My father died unexpectedly in September. Later on December 20th, my son was born. Asked the boss if I could just take through Christmas off for his birth. Didn't I just give you time off when your father died? Fuck it, I was done. Hung up my own shingle that February. Still going strong 22 years later.
It's a tough situation when life hits hard. Losing your father is never easy, and then welcoming your son brings mixed emotions. I get it. Sometimes, workplaces just don't understand. Taking that leap to start your own thing was probably the right move for you. It's good to hear that you're still thriving after all these years. Must be a sense of pride knowing you forged your own path.
I was living with an ex. My ex didn't like my one friend, and they didn't interact much. But one day after my friend had an argument with my ex. The next day, my ex said my friend was banned from the apartment. This is the apartment I pay for. The apartment my ex couldn't afford to live in if that was the only bill they had to pay. It's around 5 to 6 years later. My friend is still here, and I still live in the same apartment. My ex is long gone.
That's an interesting situation. It sounds like your ex tried to control who you could be friends with, which is kind of messed up. It's good to hear that you and your friend are still tight and living well in that apartment. Shows how things can change, and sometimes people who try to control don't stick around. You ended up with a better outcome.
I had a bad group of friends that consistently talked behind someone's back when they weren't there, and then when they saw them next, they'd act like their best friend and then talk behind someone else's back. Took me 6 months or so to realize that they probably did the exact same thing to me whenever I wasn't present, and once I realized that, I just left the group completely. I've never thought twice about it.
It's a pretty common situation, honestly. You think you have a solid group, but then you see how they treat others. It's a wake-up call when you realize they could be talking about you too. Leaving that kind of friendship is usually the best move. It's good to surround yourself with people who are genuine and supportive. No need for that drama in your life.
Stood on the streets of London, watching my best friend shriek nasty, nasty words at me. We had a few drinks that night, so to make sure I didn't forget, I actually recorded it on voice notes. I don't give up on mates easily, but something broke that night, and I have no intention of wasting my time trying to fix it. That's actually what I love about getting older. I realize what matters and what doesn't.
It's tough when a friendship takes a turn like that. Watching someone you care about go off like that can be eye-opening. Recording it was a smart way to remember though. Sometimes, people show their true selves after a few drinks. Knowing what you want to invest in as you get older is valuable. It lets you focus on relationships that lift you up rather than drag you down.
I worked at a pretty shitty job where we were always short-handed, people constantly called off, and the bosses were highly incompetent. But they let me keep the job while I was out of town for school, so I put up with it. I came back for winter break, and in the 3-week span that I was back, my boss had scheduled me for 3 days off, but in a way so that I wasn't getting any overtime and had minimal time to spend with my family and friends. Halfway through, I put in my 2-week notice.
Sounds like a rough time. The job didn't treat you well, especially when you wanted to spend time with family. It's frustrating to see bosses who don't get it. It's good you decided to put in your notice. Sometimes you just need to look out for yourself. Prioritizing your own time can really help in the long run.
My boss just made a huge mistake while I was on vacation and proceeded to blame everything on me, somehow forgetting that I was on vacation while all this went down. I have not spoken a single word other than yes or no to him. Anytime he tries to pry into my personal life or be chummy with me now, I just give him the blankiest stare until he walks the fuck away. I have 4 interviews scheduled next week. He does not know about them, and I will not give him a 2 weeks notice when I accept one of the offers. He screwed up bad.
Sounds like a tough situation. It's wild how sometimes people just can't see the bigger picture. Your boss really dropped the ball, and now you're in a position to move on. I get the silent treatment. It can be the best response sometimes. 4 interviews lined up is solid. If he couldn't appreciate your time off, it's on him now. Just focus on what's next.
Spend over 3 hours struggling on an English project that was supposed to take 30 to 45 minutes. Handed it in and got detention because it looks shit. You can't have spent more than 5 minutes on it. Tried to explain how hard it had been, got in more trouble, and gave up on English. Was diagnosed with dyslexia a year later.
Sounds frustrating. You put in a lot of effort, but it just didn't get recognized. Getting detention after all that work can feel really unfair. It's rough when teachers don't see the struggle behind the scenes. Finding out about your dyslexia later might have helped make sense of things, but it probably didn't make that experience any better. It's a tough lesson learned early on.
This happened to someone I know. They were told to seek legal advice. Their SO works in corporate law and forwarded the email to the employment department. Cue 4 weeks of paid garden leave after the boss shat themselves with the response from the law firm given the same day. Poor choice of people to pick on.
That sounds like quite a situation. It's interesting how things can escalate so quickly when there's legal advice involved. I guess the boss didn't expect that kind of pushback. It's a reminder to be careful about who you challenge and to consider the potential consequences. A simple misunderstanding turned into some serious time off. Makes you think about workplace dynamics and the power of knowledge in those situations.
If it could wait for my day off. That's just hilarious. And sad. It's not as if you plan stuff like that. Similar, my boss asked me if I could just put on a diaper when I had the norovirus. I mean, we had diapers at the job, healthcare, but you really don't want someone with the norovirus working because everyone, and their freaking cousin 3 states over will get sick.
That's a tough spot to be in. It's wild how some people don't see the big picture. I remember when I had a stomach bug and still went to work because of pressure. Not fun at all. Trying to keep it together while feeling awful is never a good plan. Your health should come first, for sure. It's usually just not worth risking everyone else getting sick.
Similar thing at a sports sunglasses company. In CO, my friend was the marketing director for 3 years. Under her tenure, they grew by 200% and she was raking in clients. A combination of her business sense and personality had won them tons of contracts. She was fired for not suiting the company image and was replaced by someone younger, prettier, and skinnier. 2 years out, their company sales were 120% of what they had been when the friend had started, down from 300%.
It's just frustrating how that stuff happens sometimes. Your friend put in the hard work, and it's wild they let her go over something like image. It sounds like the new hire hasn't really helped the company as much as she did. It's a harsh reminder that sometimes talent gets overlooked for the wrong reasons.
I had a boss that tried to pull that with me. I was under contract with another company in another field to work for 3 days in a city 4 hours away and had requested off and to use my vacation time. Boss told me I could. Then a couple days before I was about to leave, boss said no. At that point, I had already booked a hotel room. I'd get reimbursed, but not if I didn't work for the second company. I told him I'm going anyway. He threw a fit, and I walked off. Mr. Redacted, I hope your wife cheated on you again.
That sounds frustrating. It's tough when you make plans based on what a boss says, and then they change their mind right at the last minute. Walking away was probably the right move. Sometimes you just have to stand your ground, especially when it affects your time and money. Also, wishing bad things on someone like that shows how much you were fed up. It's good to vent sometimes.
Similar thing happened to me. I had applied at a retail job, and when I got the call offering me a job, I told store manager I was a bridesmaid in my cousin's wedding and she lived in another state, so I would be unavailable for a weekend in December. I told her the exact dates. She says that's perfectly fine and I will have that weekend off. Flash forward to the Wednesday before the wedding, and I get the new schedule with me working all weekend on it. Store manager just got married and was gone on a honeymoon, so I couldn't contact her about it. I go into work Thursday and tell the working manager my problem, but she just started that week and couldn't do anything about it. She gave me a list of all my coworkers' numbers, and I called everyone that might be able to cover the weekend, but no one could. So I said, fuck it. And the next morning, I just drove the 5+ hours to my cousin's anyway.
That's a rough situation. I get that you wanted to be there for your cousin's wedding. It's frustrating when work schedules change like that, especially after you communicated your plans. It's good you made the decision to go anyway. Sometimes you have to prioritize family over work. That kind of stuff can be tough to juggle, but at least you got to be part of a special moment.
I did the same thing. It was my first job. I worked at a chain restaurant as a hostess. I didn't have a car, so I took the bus and walked 4 miles to get to work on top of busing and running around all night. The two things that made me quit: 1, I would often stay until closing, which meant I had to take the last bus home and walk down the dark street to my house. I almost got kidnapped multiple times, so I told my manager I couldn't do those shifts anymore. They laughed me off. 2, I got hired in January. I had a concert that I let them know about on my application for August 24th. I reminded them throughout those months. They still schedule me to work. I got someone to cover my shift. I got a call an hour before I was supposed to work. Was already on my way to the venue from my general manager saying that person couldn't cover my shift even though another manager signed off on it. I quit the next day. I'm not going to risk my life for $3.13 an hour.
That sounds rough. The commute alone is a lot for a first job. It's wild that they didn't take your safety seriously. Getting almost kidnapped is a huge red flag. And then to ignore your concert plans, that's frustrating. It's good you stood up for yourself. No job is worth that kind of risk, especially not for such low pay. You made the right call by quitting.
When I was 19, I was at the local community college, and I was dating a girl that was a senior in high school. I got out of class and started driving to go pick her up from school. It had just rained. The guy in front of me slammed his brakes mid-lane change, and I swerved, stupidly, to avoid hitting him. I spun to the right across the other 3, thankfully empty lanes of traffic, and smashed rear first into the guardrail. After the police and everybody had been called, I called her to tell her I had been in an accident and I wouldn't make it, and the first thing she says, "So, I have to take the bus?" That ended right there.
That's kind of wild. You think you're about to score some sympathy points, and then you get hit with that. It definitely shows how priorities can be different. I mean, you're over here dealing with an accident, and she's worried about her ride. Makes you rethink what really matters in those moments. That ended the relationship pretty fast, I guess. Sometimes things just go sideways in unexpected ways.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.